Should you manage your offset smoker temperatures by controlling fuel or controlling airflow? Top pitmasters like Aaron Franklin leave their firebox doors wide open and control the fire by strategically and frequently adding wood splits as the last splits burn out. But lots of people say that you should actually control temperatures in your offset by opening and closing the firebox door or damper to limit airflow. So who's right? We're gonna find out in this video, so let's get smoking. Welcome to the Smoke Lab. My name's Steve Gow, and on this show I do crazy barbecue experiments you would never do at home, so you can learn from my trial and error. Fire management. There's a lot of different opinions on it. I started with the method I learned from Aaron Franklin's masterclass years ago, where I leave the firebox door wide open and I control temperatures with the amount and frequency of fuel that I added. For example, once I see one of the splits is starting to burn low and not provide that much heat, then I'll take another split, add it to the fire, and by the time that the original split completely dies out, the other one will have caught and provided more heat, and then in theory you should be able to run a really steady temperature that way. And the supposed benefit is that you get a much cleaner burning fire and more balanced smoky flavor. The downside is it's really labor intensive and it takes a lot of skill, and it requires me to sit by the smoker all day and night, constantly managing the fire. Not easy at this point in my life when I have two young kids running around the house, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. So the method that I've adopted recently is the damper control method, where I add fuel to the fire, and I still add fuel strategically, but I control the airflow to the fire, and that's how I control temperatures. I found that that method allows me to go away from the fire every 15 minutes or so, do other things around the house, and then come back, add fuel, adjust the dampers, then go back inside, and so on. But which method is really better than the other one? I've really never done a side-by-side scientific experiment comparing the two methods, so that's what I'm going to do in this video. Pork steak is going to be the experimental guinea pig today to test differences in smoke flavor and cook time, if any. I'm removing the bone from the pork butt and then making some steak-sized slices with a long knife. Next, I'm seasoning them with some Let's Gow general purpose rub and letting them sit on the counter for 30 minutes while I light up the pit. For the first test, I'll be using the firebox damper method, and for that, I'll be using this fire basket with a mix of charcoal and wood chunks, which I'm lighting with my Oklahoma Joe's charcoal lighter. Now the pork steaks are going on my Oklahoma Joe's Longhorn offset smoker, and now I simply open and close the firebox door slightly until I find the sweet spot that holds a steady 300 degrees. You can see that I've cut little notches in the frame so the door handle can sit snugly at different adjustment positions. Every 15 minutes or so I go back outside and add a small split to the fire and a few handfuls of charcoal. I then open the firebox door all the way so that they can catch, and then I click my little counter clicker here to collect the data on how many times I'm adding fuel and making adjustments so I can compare it later. Then after I'm almost at my target temperature of 300 degrees, I shut down the firebox door almost all the way to restrict the airflow and kind of lock in that temperature at 300. After 2 hours of running the fire with the firebox door, the pork steaks are temping around 160, so I'm removing them, I'm wrapping them in foil, and then I'm putting them in my holding oven at around 300 degrees until they get to around 185 degrees internal. I want to test this batch by taking it to a really high temperature to see if it gets any more tender than the second batch that I'm going to do, which I'm going to take off around 160 at a lower temperature. Now moving on to the next test, where I only control temperatures with the amount of fuel that I'm adding. I'm placing the fresh pork steaks on the smoker. Then let me show you my new firebox setup here. I have 2 grates now set up in a V pattern so I can get some airflow underneath them, and I can also add splits through the firebox door. I don't have to open the firebox lid every time and lose that heat. I've also got a mirror set up so I don't have to bend over all the way to the ground to see what the fire is actually doing. And I've got my splits preheating on the firebox so they catch much faster when I add them. The general method is that I see the temps starting to taper off and looking like they're going to drop below 300. Usually around this point, I'll look in the firebox and see that the last split that's in there is looking really small in terms of its flame. It's looking really black. It looks a lot weaker. Then I'll add a few handfuls of charcoal to keep the coal bed strong and a small split of wood to replace the last one. And it'll take its place in providing that extra heat that we need to keep things running at 300. This method takes a lot of observation of the fire and anticipating when the fire is going to start decreasing in temperature and adding that new split of wood before that starts happening. So you really need a lot of experience for this method, and you need to sit out by the smoker pretty much all day and learn the ins and outs. I'm doing this for 2 hours until the pork steaks hit around 160. Now I'm taking my pork steaks out of the holding oven at around 185, the ones I put in previously. So I've got 2 sets of steaks, one at 160 and one set at 185. And now I'm gonna give them a quick sear over my firebox, just flipping them constantly and getting some nice char on them. You can tell when they're done when they start sizzling like this. Finally, I'm brushing the pork butt steaks with Blues Hog Champions blend and slicing them. Neither tasted smokier than the other, and I preferred the ones taken just to 160. In fact, taking them to 145 like a regular pork chop probably wouldn't be a bad idea. I thought that I'd have to take them to a much higher temperature because pork butt tends to be really tough and it has a lot of interconnective tissue and collagen in it. That's why we take pork butts to 203 degrees until they pull apart. But in this case, I found that just taking them to a lower temperature of 160 actually gave them a lot of flavor. It retained a lot of juiciness and natural pork flavor, and they still weren't super tough. They were a bit more gristly than, let's say, a ribeye, but they were still really good. So which fire management method turned out to be better? Let's look at the data. I was targeting 300 degrees, but both tests actually ran at 287 and 289 on average, which is actually pretty consistent and close to 300. That tells me the data is going to be a good comparison between the two methods. The standard deviation of the damper control method was 27, which was much smaller than the fuel control method, which was 34. That basically means that the damper control method had steadier temperatures with less swings up and down. I visited the smoker 2 less times over 2 hours with the damper method. So if this were a 12-hour brisket cook, that would mean I would have to visit the smoker 12 less times over 12 hours, which is a pretty big difference. And the average intervals between visiting the smoker were slightly less with the damper control method, which means that there was more time between me going out to add fuel or make adjustments with the damper control method, which makes it more convenient. The smoke flavor of each test was the same. In fact, the only real downside to the damper control method was that there was a ton of damper adjustments that I had to make while I was at the smoker, whereas with the fuel only method, I only had to add fuel a couple times. There was no damper adjustments to make. So in conclusion, in this specific experiment, the damper control method was much more convenient, it was easier, and it resulted in steadier temperatures with less temperature swings. That generally matches up with my own experience. The way that I see it is kind of like learning how to sharpen knives. You could spend 100 hours learning how to hone your knife on a sharpening stone and getting really good at it. You're not going to get any results in the first couple times that you do it. I've actually tried this. I'm in the process of learning how to do it. You have to put a lot of work into it to learn it and get good results. But once you put the time in, then it gives you super insanely sharp blades. Whereas if you don't want to put that time in, you can just get an electric sharpener, have no experience, and it's like zip, 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 and your knife is good enough. That's what these fire management techniques are like. The fuel only method is like a pro level method. If you want to take the time to sit out by the smoker all day and really learn how to manage smoker temperatures by adding fuel and the frequency that you add the fuel and become one with the fire, if that appeals to you, then that method might be really good. On the other hand, the damper control method allows you to manage your fire and smoker temperatures more casually, go inside while you do other things, just jump outside every 15 minutes or so and then add fuel and make damper adjustments, and you're still gonna get really good results. That's why it works for me at this particular season in my life when I have 2 young kids. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments section below. Which method do you prefer? Do you use a different method? Do you think one method might work better on a smaller or larger offset smoker? Or maybe you could combine the 2 methods to get better results. Let me know in the comment section below. I will see you in the next video, and until next time, happy smoking.